times has had that problem. But she still has a live radio show every Friday night via the internet. You can also download the show after broadcast as a podcast, which is what I did. In fact, she recently bought 2 Arizona radio stations, so my guess is that she'll be back on the air. I guess she can't argue with management if she's the owner of the station. But she's had health problems. That's another reason why she hasn't been on the air on a regular basis recently. But she talks or talked a whole lot about the business part of radio and the business part of rock and roll and pop music. And it got me to thinking that some of the biggest names in music in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and beyond, you may or may not have even heard of these people. Or if you have heard of them, you thought, well, they weren't very big. Yeah, they were. They were huge because they did the writing or the promoting or the fill in the blank. They were performers, but they were also the behind the scenes people. In other words, they wore more than one hat in the business. Okay. There's a whole bunch of them. In fact, I have a list that I wanted to go through. And where's that list here? Great. I put it somewhere. Where did I put my list? Where's my list? Here it is. The list. And I'm going to go ahead and name these people. And then I'm going to go back and name their net worth, okay? Don Kirshner. You remember Don Kirshner's rock concert? Yeah, sure. We remember him. In fact, he's the only one on the list that's not still with us. He passed away in 2011. Burt Bacharach, Neil Sedaka, Neil Diamond, Carole King, Herb Alpert. You've heard of all these people. At least you've heard of most of them. And you probably thought to yourself, yeah, you know what? These folks were around. They had a few hits. They really haven't been much lately. But how big of players could they have been in the music industry? Well, a lot of times you measure success with a dollar sign. Okay, I'm going to tell you what these people are worth, and you will be shocked. Don Kirshner, remember, he died in 2011, okay? So he hasn't been around for 9 years, 8 years. In 2011, when Don Kirshner died, he was worth $50 million. Burt Bacharach, still around at 91, he's worth $200 million. Neil Diamond, $175 million. Neil Sedaka is worth $300 million. Carole King had a handful of hits, right? She's worth $70 million. $70 million. And Carole King hasn't worked probably in 35 years. Herb Alpert. Yeah, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. Yeah, sing some songs, right? What is Herb Alpert worth? $850 million. He's almost a billionaire, okay? Now, these were singers, musicians, sure, but they were also writers and businessmen first. And each and every one of them got their start in the Brill Building. Now, what is the Brill Building, you say? Well, the Brill Building I guess it's not anymore, but it was basically a bunch of offices where music was written and sold to recording artists. It was like a boilerplate operation for songwriters. And basically, they put a whole bunch of these songwriters into rooms and had them write music. That was in one part of the Brill Building. In the other part of the Brill Building were the musicians who took the songs and recorded them. And who managed this whole thing? Don Kirshner. Yeah, remember that droll guy from the 70s? Hi, I'm Don Kirshner, and this is Don Kirshner's rock concert. We watched it every Saturday night. And because he had a different act on all the time, they were always good. But he had that droll, drab address. And it was kind of his shtick, okay? But some of the writers that Don Kirshner hired for the Brill Building boilerplate operation, check this out. Burt Bacharach, Sonny Bono, Neil Diamond, Tony Orlando, Carole King, Marvin Hamlish, Neil Sedaka, Paul Simon, Phil Spector, Steve Terrell. Some of the musicians who took those songs and made them popular, Bobby Darin, The Drifters, Steely Dan, Fagan and Becker, Frankie Valli, Dionne Warwick. And that was all done in one building by one guy, Don Kirshner. Now, I know you're thinking, Strong, these aren't the kings and queens of rock and roll. Come on. Well, actually, rock and roll / pop music. Let's say that, okay, to be fair. But really, they are. They're some of the top folks. And I'll tell you why. Because when you go see Guns N' Roses, okay, at a concert, Guns N' Roses is getting paid for that night. When you buy an album from Metallica, Metallica gets a cut of that album that you bought, okay? When you hear I'm a Believer on the radio, no matter who performs it, or you hear it as a jingle for an ad, or if you're watching some movie that has I'm a Believer in it, Neil Diamond gets paid every single time. Now, sometimes it's just pennies, but that's the truth. If you hear I'm a Believer on the radio, Neil Diamond's getting paid for that. That time, every time. Now, sometimes it's just fractions of a cent, but he's getting paid every single time. Because you see, dear listeners, it's the writers who make the big dough in the music business. The writers have always made the big dough. Now, even after the hype peaks, they don't OD. They aren't alcoholics. They're not exciting frontmen for the most part, okay? They don't have the multiple wives or husbands for the most part. They're rather boring, okay? They're very hardworking. They're creative people who have a knack for writing catchy tunes, matching the tunes to the artist, or both. And the other interesting thing about all those people that I named, every last one of them, I think with the exception of Tony Orlando, they're all Jewish, every one of them, which I found very interesting, okay? They're all good business people. And that's who makes the money, the good business people, okay? Let's start with Don Kirshner. He was a musician once upon a time, but not a very successful one. But what Don Kirshner found at a very, very young age is, even though he really wasn't much of a musician, he knew good music when he heard it. And I guess he listened to his own and figured it wasn't that good. So he branched out and became something else. In fact, Don Kirshner was known in the business as the man with the golden ear. He had an ear for music. He could listen to something and say, you know what, that's going to be popular. People are going to like this. Or he could listen to something and say, no one's going to buy that. And he had the knack for doing that and taking a song and linking it with an artist. Okay. He ran the Brill Building Boiler Room. He ran it. That was him. He was also a music manager. And some of the groups that he managed, the Monkees, the Archies, Kansas. Now, the Monkees and the Archies, they were a group who was just put together to make money, okay? And they got their hit songs from the Brill Room Boiler Room operation. Then he had Don Kirshner's Rock Concert, which was the #1 rated rock and roll type of event until MTV came along. In fact, when MTV came along, it was kind of to replace Don Kirshner's Rock Concert. People saw that Don Kirshner's Rock Concert for 2 hours every Saturday night was so popular. So let's put together a television station that, for all intents and purposes, is Don Kirshner's Rock Concert 24/7. He was dull. He was droll, but that was his shtick. He died of a heart attack in 2011 at the age of 76. Still working, by the way. He had one wife, so he never had to write the alimony checks. He never had to split the fortune 2 ways. And he was Jewish. Burt Bacharach. Bacharach and David. Bacharach and Carol Bayer Sager. You've heard the songwriting duos, okay? Burt Bacharach started off as a Brill Building Boiler Room star, okay? His songs have been recorded, get this, by over 1,000 artists. And remember, he's the writer of those songs. So he got paid every time. Still does when they get played on the radio. 73 U.S. and 52 UK top 40 hits. That's unbelievable. Some of the artists that have recorded Burt Bacharach songs: Perry Como, Marty Robbins, Dusty Springfield, Tom Jones, B.J. Thomas, The Carpenters, Dionne Warwick. That's a who's list, folks. Number one hits: This Guy's in Love, recorded by Herb Alpert. Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head by B.J. Thomas. Close to You by The Carpenters. Arthur's Theme by Christopher Cross. That's What Friends Are For, recorded by all kinds of people. And it was also the theme to a movie. Again, he got paid on all that. Number one hits. Now, he's kind of the exception to the rule when it comes to wives, because Burt Bacharach had 4 wives, but 2 of the 4 wives had a bunch of money, so he didn't have to write him a check. Angie Dickinson had lots of money, so he didn't have to write her a check. And Carol Bayer Sager had lots of money, so he didn't have to write her a check. And his 4th wife, still married to her, and has been since 1993. The other secret behind Burt Bacharach: he's still performing. He's still working. He's 91 years old, okay? His net worth, $200 million. And he's Jewish. Next on the list, Neil Sedaka. Again, a Brill Building boiler room star. That's where he started. Neil Sedaka has written over 500 songs. He sold millions of his own records, still performs. Now, Neil Sedaka was very popular in the early 60s with the bubblegum doo-wop stuff, okay? Then after the Beatles, rock and roll, he kind of went into oblivion, and people didn't really like his music. He couldn't record anything here. He went to, he performed in Australia. He went to England, much, much, much smaller markets, but he could still perform live there and make a living with his family, okay? But then he had a resurgence, okay? Back in the 70s, he said some of these old songs, and he had never really produced an album. He just had singles. So he put all these songs into an album, all these old Neil Sedaka songs into an album. They'd never been put together before. But he needed to find somebody who had faith in him to put this album together and to help him with his comeback. And he stumbled upon Elton John. Elton John at that time had Rocket Records, okay? He said, this is a good idea, put them together, and Neil Sedaka came back. He had the song Bad Blood. He redid his song Breaking Up Is Hard to Do. Started making a ton of money again. Continued to write. In fact, there was a record producer by the name of Stig Anderson, Swedish guy. And he came to Neil Sedaka and says, look, you're a good guy. I got this new group of people that they really need someone to write a song for them. And could you write a song for these folks? Okay. It's a Swedish quintet, or quartet, I should say. And he wrote a song called Ring, Ring for a new group called ABBA. Yep. Neil Sedaka cashed the checks once again. And he keeps re-releasing his old music. He still releases albums all the time, just re-releasing the same songs as duets with somebody or singing them a different way or something, okay? Now, they don't sell a ton of records, okay? They don't sell a ton. They're never top sellers, but something to remember. He's still working. He's still producing. And even though not a whole lot of people buy them, he gets all the royalties because he wrote it. He produced it. He sang it. And quite often he self-publishes the albums. So he gets all the money, okay? A little bit of a ton of money is a lot. But all of a bit of the money is also a lot, especially when you're doing this almost every year, okay? He still performs at 80 years old. And it's funny, the places he performs, one of his most popular venues, check this out. If you want to talk about a guy who's a businessman, he sells out consistently at rock concerts, at the Villages, and other retirement communities. That, my friends, is a stroke of genius. I mean, think